The biting wind clawed at Alatar's face, each gust a frigid reminder of his folly. He, Alatar the Renowned, the master of arcane energies, was stranded. Not merely lost, but marooned in the teeth of the spine of the world, the mountain range that cleaved the land in two. His arrogance, a familiar companion, had led him here. He'd sought a forgotten grimoire, rumored to contain spells of unimaginable power, dismissing warnings of treacherous peaks and other dangers. Now, his breath plumed out in white clouds, momentarily obscuring the jagged, snow-laden peaks that surrounded him. He needed shelter, and fast. Just as despair began to creep in, a faint glimmer of light pierced the gloom. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. As he rounded a bend, the village of Oakhaven came into view, or rather, what remained of it. Oakhaven clung precariously to the mountainside, a collection of dilapidated wooden houses, their roofs sagging under the weight of the snow. A chilling silence hung in the air, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind. It was a silence that screamed of abandonment, of tragedy. Yet, a thin ribbon of smoke curled from the chimney of one of the larger buildings, a beacon in the desolation. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the hilt of his staff, which shimmered with barely contained magical energy. The air crackled with an unnatural cold, a tangible manifestation of something. He reached the building, a sturdy structure that had once been the village hall. Inside, a meager fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Around the fire sat a group of figures, their faces gaunt and lined with worry. They looked up as he entered, their eyes widening in surprise and fear. "Who are you?" A woman with silver streaks in her dark hair spoke, her voice raspy. "I am Alatar," he replied, his voice echoing slightly in the large, cavernous room. "A traveler, lost in the mountains. I seek shelter from the storm." The woman scrutinized him, her gaze lingering on his staff and the intricate runes etched into his cloak. "We have no need of magic here. I offer no harm," Alatar said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Only a desire for warmth and a safe place to rest." After a moment of tense silence, a man with a weathered face and kind eyes spoke. "Alara, he looks weary and the storm worsens, let him stay." He turned to Alatar. "I am Torin, the elder of this village. You are welcome to share our fire, mage, but know that Oakhaven is not a place of comfort or ease." Alatar bowed his head in gratitude. "Thank you, Torin." As he settled in, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The villagers were withdrawn, their faces etched with a deep sorrow, and there was that unnatural cold that clung to the air, a presence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He decided to broach the subject carefully. "I sense a great sadness here," he said, his voice low. "What troubles Oakhaven?" The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Ilara sighed. "Oakhaven is cursed, mage, haunted by the ghosts of its past." He had dealt with spirits before, but usually they were easily dispelled. "Not like any you have encountered, I suspect," Torin said, his voice heavy with grief. "Years ago, a terrible tragedy befell this village. A landslide, triggered by a foolish mining expedition, buried half of Oakhaven. Many were lost. Their spirits remain, trapped between worlds, filled with anger and sorrow. They torment us, mage, they drain our life force, our hope, they whisper in the night, driving us to despair." "And there is nothing you can do?" Alatar asked. "Prayers to the gods, rituals of cleansing, offerings of peace. Nothing works. The ghosts are too strong, their pain too deep. We are doomed to wither away, slowly, until Oakhaven is nothing but a ghost town." Alatar felt a stirring of something within him. Not pity, but a sense of challenge. He was a sorcerer, a wielder of powerful magic. He had faced down demons and battled ancient evils. Could he not help these poor villagers? He decided to investigate. "I will help you," he said, his voice firm. "I will try to break this curse." "You would do that for us?" Torin asked. "I would," Alatar replied. "But I need to know more. Tell me everything about the landslide. about the ghosts, about the history of Oakhaven. Over the next few days, Alatar immersed himself in the history of Oakhaven. He learned of the prosperous mining community that had thrived in the mountains for generations. He heard tales of the greed that had driven the villagers to dig too deep, too carelessly, ignoring the warnings of the mountain. He listened to accounts of the landslide, the deafening roar, the earth shaking, the screams of the dying. He learned their names, their stories, their regrets. As he listened, he began to understand the nature of the curse. It wasn't simply a matter of restless spirits, it was something deeper, something more insidious. The ghosts were fueled by the collective guilt and despair of the living. The villagers were trapped in a cycle of grief, their sorrow feeding the very entities that tormented them. To break the curse, he would have to break this cycle. He started by exploring the ruins of the old village, the site of the landslide. The air was thick with spectral energy, the ground saturated with sorrow. He could hear the faint whispers of the dead, their voices filled with anguish and rage. He cast a spell to enhance his senses, to allow him to see the ghosts more clearly. What he saw chilled him to the bone. The ghosts were not simply wispy apparitions. They were twisted, grotesque figures, their bodies mangled and broken, their faces contorted in eternal agony. They were surrounded by a swirling vortex of negative energy, a miasma of grief and resentment. He understood then that simply dispelling them would not be enough. He had to find a way to release them from their suffering, the harashi. He spent days researching ancient texts, poring over dusty tomes of forgotten lore. He consulted with the village shaman, a wizened old woman named Lyra, who possessed a deep understanding of the spiritual world. He learned of an ancient ritual, a ceremony of forgiveness and release that could potentially break the curse. But the ritual required a rare and powerful artifact, the Heartstone of Oakhaven, a crystal said to be imbued with the spirit of the mountain itself. Finding the Heartstone would be a perilous undertaking. The ruins were unstable, riddled with hidden dangers and guarded by the vengeful spirits of the dead. But Alatar knew that it was the only way to save Oakhaven. He prepared himself for the task, gathering his magical tools, fortifying his spirit, and steeling his resolve. He ventured into the ruins, his staff glowing with an ethereal light. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. He could feel the eyes of the ghosts upon him, their hatred burning like ice. He faced down terrifying apparitions, battling them with spells of protection and banishment. He used his magic to clear away debris, searching for any sign of the Heartstone. Days turned into nights, and still, he found nothing. The ghosts grew bolder, their attacks more frequent and ferocious. He was weary, his body aching, his spirit strained. He began to doubt himself, to wonder if he was simply delaying the inevitable doom of Oakhaven. Then, one day, as he was clearing away a particularly large pile of rubble, he saw it. He frantically cleared away the remaining debris, his heart pounding with anticipation, and there it was, the Heartstone of Oakhaven. It was a large, multifaceted crystal, radiating a soft, warm light. He reached out and touched it, and a wave of energy washed over him, filling him with a sense of peace and tranquility. He had found it, but his trials were far from over. As he held the Heartstone, the ground began to tremble. The ghosts surged forward, their rage reaching a fever pitch. The very air crackled with malevolent energy. Alatar knew that he had to act quickly. He raced back to the village, the ghosts hot on his heels. He reached the village hall, where the villagers were huddled together in fear. "I have the Heartstone," he shouted. "Prepare for the ritual!" The villagers, galvanized by his words, sprang into action. They gathered the necessary materials, reciting ancient chants and preparing the sacred space. Alatar placed the Heartstone in the center of the room, its light illuminating the faces of the villagers, filling them with a renewed sense of hope. Alatar led the villagers in a powerful chant, a prayer for forgiveness and release. He channeled his magic through the Heartstone, amplifying its energy and projecting it outwards, towards the ghosts. The ghosts recoiled from the light, their forms flickering and dissolving. But they did not give up easily. They unleashed their full power, their rage shaking the very foundations of the village. The air grew thick with spectral energy, the walls trembled, and the villagers cried out in fear. Alatar struggled to maintain control, his body straining, his mind reeling. Then, as the ghosts were about to overwhelm him, something unexpected happened. One by one, the villagers stepped forward, offering words of forgiveness and compassion. They spoke to the ghosts, acknowledging their pain, their loss, their anger. They asked for forgiveness for the mistakes of the past, for the greed and carelessness that had led to the landslide. They offered their love and their support, their understanding and their empathy. As they spoke, the energy in the room began to shift. The hatred and resentment of the ghosts began to dissipate, replaced by a glimmer of understanding, of acceptance, of peace. Finally, as the last villager spoke, the ghosts began to transform. They were no longer twisted, grotesque figures, but radiant beings of light. They smiled at the villagers, their eyes filled with gratitude and love. Then, one by one, they faded away, ascending to the next world, finally free from their suffering. The curse was broken, the village of Oakhaven was free, the air was clear, the silence peaceful, and the faces of the villagers were filled with joy and relief. Alatar collapsed to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. He had saved Oakhaven. In the days that followed, Oakhaven began to rebuild. The villagers worked together, repairing the damaged buildings and clearing away the debris. They planted new crops, revived old traditions, and celebrated their newfound freedom. They honored the memory of the dead, not with grief and despair, but with love and respect. Alatar remained in Oakhaven for a time, helping the villagers to rebuild their lives and to heal their wounds. He taught them about magic, about the power of forgiveness, and about the importance of respecting the natural world. He bid farewell to the villagers, promising to return someday. As he walked away from Oakhaven, he looked back one last time. The village was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, a symbol of hope and resilience. He smiled, knowing that he had made a difference, that he had brought light to a place of darkness. He continued his journey, carrying with him the lessons he had learned in Oakhaven, the memory of the ghosts he had helped to release, and the knowledge that even the most powerful sorcerer can be humbled by the power of compassion.